Hello and welcome everyone to the Singularity Lab. Amazing to have you all here in the chat. We've got a heck of a show lined up for you today. If you're new to the Singularity Lab, this is the show where we focus on the breaking technology, science, and futurism. We also throw in some UAP discoveries. And one of the most difficult things about futurism, you guys, is what? It's our cognitive biases and logical fallacies. And one of the things that we've been doing here on the Singularity Lab every single Tuesday and Thursday is bringing you 52, I think it's 52 cards. I think I got 52 cards here of logical.
We're not poker players.
52 cards here of logical fallacies and cognitive biases. And we go through one every day so that we can improve our logic and be better futurists. All right, so today, our cognitive bias is the sunk cost fallacy. You guys, anybody familiar with the sunk cost fallacy?
No.
All too well.
All right, so after I share the definition, rather, I'm going to be shooting it to you for you to share the sunk cost fallacy. You irrationally cling to things that have already cost you something. When you've invested your time, money, or emotion into something, it hurts to let it go. Ask yourself, had I not already invested something, would I still do so now? I wonder how many people in the UFO Twitter community feel that way.
Huh.
Oh, yeah. Great point.
Well, I'll let you know September 7th. How about that?
Yes, the sunk cost fallacy. I've definitely been some, like, you know, it's you get into, I don't know, like a hobby. You could get into a hobby, spend a ton of money on like Beanie Babies, and then all of a sudden, you know, you're shit out of luck.
Beanie Babies.
Stuck with Beanie Babies.
Yeah, and then you don't want to throw them out because you think one day maybe they'll rise in value.
Exactly.
We have a drawer full of his baseball cards, so yeah.
Which, man, baseball cards and comics tanked. I got so many great baseball cards and comics, and they're just not worth anything.
Ooh, I've got a ton of great baseball cards.
Very sad.
Really good baseball cards. But yeah, I haven't looked at the value of them in a while.
No, yeah, it's you don't.
Well, I mean, look, it took 50 years. I always told myself it took 50 years for a Babe Ruth or a Mickey Mantle card to be worth anything. And the cool thing I think about the baseball cards that I have is they're right before that steroid era. You know, like like I've got a Barry Bonds baseball card where he was skinny. You know, like and same thing with Mark McGwire. So it's just funny.
Yeah, do you remember we had public congressional hearings for baseball players who were doping? Congressional hearings for baseball players who were doping. Like,
what a waste of time.
And we can't get congressional hearings for
UFOs. What's going on? That's a great point.
What?
That's such a great point.
Like,
if we could talk about this,
I don't know about.
Oh my God.
That's
also trying to like elevate their political status. A lot of them use that event to be like, I'm coming down on steroids. Look at me, I'm your leader. And God, it's so stupid. It's like good medicine. You know, like I remember at the time telling people, guys, it's not like they're getting horse steroids from some guy, you know, who just came across the border from someone's trunk. You know, like they're made by people on lab coats.
Considered steroids, right?
Well, you're not. It's illegal. It's illegal to intravenously inject vitamin B, I believe, without a doctor's without a doctor.
Yeah, well, they were doing highly like human growth hormones.
Yeah,
anybody could go into any clinic nowadays and get the exact same thing these guys are getting, but they are elite athletes and they get the growth hormones. So it's like it peaks a little bit, but dude, it's good medicine. Like people are taking it like it now because of human growth hormones. You can, you know, come back from a serious knee injury where in the 80s or 90s your career's over.
Right. Simon Fly says Joe Rogan on horse drugs.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys heard about that today, but Joe Rogan is in the hospital with COVID, and he's taking the horse.
Is he in the hospital?
I believe he's in the hospital. Yeah.
Wow.
I know he's sick. I don't know if they said he was in the
Well,
hospital.
where did he do that video from? Looked like he was doing it from his like compound in Texas or something.
He may not
outside.
be in the hospital. He may be in his compound.
Yeah, I think they hooked him up on steroids, and he's feeling great right now. We'll see how long that lasts.
You guys, we have an amazing guest today, and every second that passes that he's not on the stage hanging out with us is like a dagger to my heart. So I'm gonna bring him in here. We've got Phillip Shane with us today. He's an award-winning documentary filmmaker with over 25 years of experience. He was co-director and editor of Being Elmo, winner of Special Jury Prize at 2011 Sundance Film Festival, and producer and editor of the 2-hour feature documentary EINSTEIN in 2008 from the History Channel. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Phillip Shane.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I certainly don't want to be responsible for any daggers to your heart.
You don't want the dagger guilt.
No. Indeed. And the funny thing is, I realize in that bio, I need to update that it's now over 30 years experience. Although at a certain point, I don't think you want to keep,
You just leave it. You just leave it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
29 years of experience forever.
29 and that. Yeah. But it's so cool to be here. I am such big fans of your show. I mean, I discovered it only recently. I rage tweeted hate at it, and then got a reply and I had my life changed. I'm a different person. I used to have a beard. I mean, you can see the picture you put up from wherever you go. I'm a different person. I come here with humility and gratitude.
Pounds.
Do you mind sharing the story about the rage tweet?
I don't mind.
Okay.
So I guess we had Mick West was on our show, and I had discovered I knew nothing about Mick outside of his YouTube channel. I had been watching it for a while, and I thought, yeah, he's really cool. On our podcast, What the If, we kind of take science topics and then have fun with it, as you guys do. And anyway, had Mick West on, so I my YouTube then started serving up other things that Mick was on, and one of them was a show with you guys, and Kent By was on.
Oh yes,
and
right.
So
I'm sure pretty much everybody who's watching this right now saw that episode of the Unidentified Slayer Review. So anything you say from here on out is going to hit home for them.
Okay,
yeah.
So if Dr. By is watching, apologies. This is purely an intellectual situation, but anyway, I watched it and it was like, oh, Kent By is who I was not familiar with at all, and Mick West are gonna not even debate. Well, they're gonna talk, right? They're gonna talk UFOs. All right.
Right.
Kind of turned out to be, unfortunately, I could see that Kent had clearly had a lot of coffee that day. I can totally relate, but he kind of had a PowerPoint presentation that he was going to get through no matter what in limited time, and it kind of was just he bulldozed his way through a PowerPoint presentation, and I was frustrated because I genuinely come to these things, wanting to learn, wanting to hear. I'm interested. All right. So I'd never seen your show before. Yeah. And it's funny. It was one of those things like, if you don't like I don't know, you go see a movie, you don't like a movie, you come out, you're like, but if you went in there really psyched for a movie, and I may or may not be referring to certain prequel episodes of a certain beloved series. You may go
Disney.
Yeah. You may go to a movie with a great excitement and then feel enraged on the way out because what? So Kent By started going into trade federations and all this stuff, and I was like, what the? But I was like,
he's talking about spice.
Spice, yeah.
Holy God! No, we're cross-referencing things now. Like, we can't cross the streams on these kinds of conversations.
Yeah,
please,
Hurricane
gets
Geek.
us. They get us.
Hurricane Geek just flew through here. So anyway, I then went to tweet it, and you shouldn't do this, people. You should calm down before you hit the tweet. And I couldn't, I barely fit it into the number of characters you can get on the tweet, and I typed, and my tweet was, and I've left it up. You guys said, it's okay, leave it up for posterity. And I was like, all I remember is basically disappointed, lost opportunity. Don't watch this show. Meaning only that episode, but then anyway. And then one of you, and I believe it was Mike, replied very nicely, haters gonna hate. And then I saw that and I was like, oh no, I don't mean hate. It was no, and because I very much approach this with sense of like really wanting dialogue and stuff. And I was like, oh my God, I'm the guy. I'm the nasty tweeter. Somebody used the expression, apparently there's people on who have their avatar on Twitter, they have a circle and a line through it or something like that.
Right.
You know, and I'm just like, I was like, oh my God, I'm that guy. Kept watching, and I was like, wow, not only was that slightly aberrant episode for you guys, but this is such a great show. And then, man, I've gone down the rabbit hole. I'm on all the time. So some of you in the chat, I've hung out with you a little bit more recently, and I had to have you guys on our podcast. So we did that. Yeah. I'm a big fan. Finding the middle ground, building bridge. I was trying to think of what would be a name for like this phenomenon. And I thought, this is not the greatest thing in the world, but I thought Sky Bridge. And like something, you know, you just want to bridge. You have to bridge these two very
Isn't that, it sounds like something in the Grand Canyon. They have that Sky Bridge.
Or
it's
a
true.
new hospital.
Yeah.
Joe Rogan's in the Sky Bridge.
This is going to be a fun day. Yeah. I can tell. All right. So fantastic. Thank you so much again, Phillip, for joining us. And thank you for sharing that story. And I think you're right. Like, I think it's so important for us to like have these conversations, but I think you're right. I mean, that show, you know, that episode, we didn't do a good job of like organizing a debate. It was not what you would recognize, anyone would recognize it as a debate. It's a PowerPoint. And Kent later realized that, and he felt so bad about it. I felt so bad for him because he's felt so bad about it, and he was lamenting on Twitter, and we were just like, it's okay. Like, stay off the Sky Bridge. It's going to be all right.
Yeah.
Get down from the sky.
Get off the Sky Bridge.
Yeah. Get down to treetop level.
Yeah. Come down to the treetops. All right, so let's learn about Phillip Shane, if we could. I'd love to hear about, you know, what got you into documentary filmmaking, and then I'm going to share with you my perception of like the documentary industry, and it's not going to be mean or nice. It's just going to be what I take away from it often, and I want to get your feedback on it because I think you could probably enlighten me a little bit. So maybe you could tell us how you got into documentary filmmaking.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to that perspective. I got into documentary filmmaking because I was working at NASA and realized it is not like Star Wars. It was hard, and there was a lot of math and budgets and things like that. But real quick, what happened was I was in high school. You know, I grew up loving science and science fiction very, very much equally. And Carl Sagan was on, Cosmos was on, I think when I was like 8 or something growing up. He became a huge hero of mine. And I always loved this. I just felt like, wow, that's really cool. Like you can learn something and then teach other people about it. And that was kind of fun. So even like in 5th or 6th grade, I was like, with permission of teachers or something, I was going and giving science lessons to the kindergartners and the 2nd graders, like Cosmos type things. And why is the sky blue and things like that. And anyway, I always enjoyed that. And I started pursuing, in high school, you don't really pick a major or anything, obviously, but like I was like, oh, okay, if I'm going to do something, it's going to be engineering. Computers were coming out, so it's going to be something like that. And I loved astronomy. So I was going to do engineering or astronomy, something oriented. And I grew up in Maryland, in Montgomery County, right just over the border from Washington, D.C. And the NASA facility there is the Goddard Space Center, which is an amazing place. And the space shuttle was ran out of there. A lot of space shuttle stuff was done there. The Hubble, I think, originally has had a lot of base there a lot. Anyway, NASA held a contest for local school children with Orbital Systems, which then was a very small company. I think they've grown to be quite a big contractor. Anyway, it was for kids. Can kids come up? If you can come up, high school students can come up with an experiment that's worthy and able to fly easily on the space shuttle. Whoever wins will have their little experiment fly on the space shuttle. And they had a thing then called the Getaway Special Program, which was if you see images of the cargo bay, they go up into shuttle, go into orbit, the doors would open, right? And inside you might see, if you look at pictures, giant round cans, kind of the size of this table or whatever, bolted to the side. So whenever there was extra space or weight, they'd have these things. And anybody could rent these things and put whatever they wanted in it, as long as it didn't need to be maintained in any way. Interestingly, Spielberg had rented one of these and apparently put a camera in there and cut out a window and was getting, I don't know whatever happened to this, but it was like was shooting footage of the
Wow.
Earth. Just seeing what he could do. Anyway, so I won this program, and I had a project that was going to fly, and so that was really cool. And then also as a junior in high school, it's around that time you can choose your internship. What are you going to do? And I was like, oh, I want to work at NASA. And so amazingly, through the high school and through a family friend, I managed to get an internship at the Goddard Space Center. And they said, well, since your experiment will be flying in this program, they kind of put me in a similar thing, but a little higher grade program. And this one was called Spartan. And Spartan was, instead of being bolted to the side of the cargo bay, it was a cube thing, what we now might call a CubeSat or a microsat, and had little retro rockets all around it. And it was a box, and you could put whatever you wanted in it. And so Alan Stern, who would go on to be the head of the New Horizons mission that went to Pluto and things like that. At the time, he was at University of Colorado, and he had a program called Spartan Halley. So they were going to put, astronomical instruments that were going to study Halley's Comet, which was was approaching at that time. So I was working out of Goddard on this, just as an intern, doing whatever, a bunch of little things. I think I was on there for like 3 or 4 years. I have to go back and look, but tragically, that launched on the Challenger mission, the one with the teacher in space.
Yeah.
Crazy. So I certainly from the least tragic part of that, although I'm sure, Alan and his team, they were devastated, of course.
Right.
And so, I never put two and two together, but it was only in later years I look back and I was like, maybe that was part of this. That I was by that point a sophomore in college, and you feel like, oh my God, what if I graduate with the wrong degree?
Right.
What if I send myself down the wrong path? And I was like, I always loved movies, and I had done a lot. I did a lot of theater and comedy and improv and all this kind of stuff. I was like, I feel like I might
be in the wrong place,
wind up in the wrong path,
Yeah.
So I switched I actually considered architecture, and then thought, this is pretty close to engineering. But it had that artistic blend. So I went to film, love it, film, and then wound up in documentaries pretty quickly, because I was like, you know what? In my mind, this scene never happened. But in the movie I made of my life, I'm leaving Goddard, and they're just sad. Oh, why? How are you? I'm this skinny kid. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I really gotta go. But as I leave,
potential.
Yeah.
suddenly my voice hits the proper deep register just long enough to say, I may be leaving. I am not abandoning you. I will tell your stories.
While the hottest woman in the town goes, I hope you find what you're looking for. And then you end up going back only to marry her.
I must say that part of this equation was that there were absolutely no women in the sciences at that time, nor at NASA. And there were some in the film department. So I won't say that was part of the equation, but maybe. But I did think, I was like, you know what? I had loved Carl Sagan. And so I just wrapped this up, saying that I was like, I can be a translator. Like I know, I speak science. And so I could do that, right? I could be like Carl Sagan or make documentaries. So I just went into documentaries and wound up, interestingly, not exclusively in science, which was good, because I also, I just love interesting people, but to the extent I could choose what projects I would take on or get hired for, I found myself gravitating towards films about people that I just found incredibly inspiring. I was like, if I'm going to spend, you spend like anywhere from 6 months to a year or 2 years or 4 years or, something in the life of some person you're making a documentary about, I figured I might as well go into somebody who I can really find a lot. And I got to, at ABC, my first job at ABC, so I worked with Peter Jennings at ABC and a number of amazing producers there. And I got to edit a documentary about Martin Luther King. And that really was like, wow, this is amazing. Like spending my life day after day after day, living, learning from an inspiring person. And so to the extent ever I could come around to doing science too, I would do that. I did approach making stories about the arts. I wanted to share, I thought, I really want to share the technical side of what these artists or musicians or puppeteers do, the kind of geek side of it, for those who just think it's sort of just, oh, it's all inspiration and whatever. Mm-hmm. And then I wanted to really, whenever I could, if I got science-oriented projects, bring in, I wouldn't call it the artistic side, but just the human side, the emotional side, really show the human aspect of that. So I do all that. And then finally, after many years of, I followed podcasts. I listened to the radio growing up, of course, and all that. I started this podcast now about 4 years ago called What the If, in which we kind of get to do that. We have science. I have two scientists as co-hosts, and very often we have guests who come on. And one of my favorite expressions was Sean Carroll, a great physicist and popular science educator, was on once, and the show was called What the If. It's a what if thing. We do thought experiments, but we really encourage our guests to sort of say, look, what if, let's just follow it. This is the equivalent of what we would call spitballing or something. Because I know that when scientists are by themselves, they're at the tea and crumpets break, or they're in the cafe or the bar or the pub, depending on which university
branch of science.
Yeah, which branch of science you're at. Exactly. Yeah. The den. So Sean Carroll said he loved being on our show because he really got to let his hair down,
right?
And which is hard for them to do, especially in so that's sort of my thing there. And one thing you maybe in particular, I worked on of most interest perhaps to your audience is I was one of the editors of a documentary that we did for ABC News and National Geographic called Peter Jennings was the host, UFOs, Seeing is Believing. Yeah. And that was a profound experience in my life.
What year was that again, Philip? Can you remind me?
I think it's 2005.
Yeah.
It's right around there.
Yeah.
The Phoenix Lights was new.
I think I was 25 at that time, and I remember that being a big deal. I'm like, dude, I gotta be home for this. This was, cool. I think right around DVR time. And I didn't have one, so I was like, I was living in New York City, and I definitely didn't have a VCR. So I was like, dude, Peter Jennings is talking about UFOs. Can I ask you real quick? Maybe we're putting the cart before the horse, but I have to know: did he have an interest in this? Was he genuinely curious? Did he walk away after the documentary going, "Oh, these things are real"?
I wouldn't say that he had that a definite thing at the end like that, but I can talk about it for a second. But I would say the cart before the horse. Let's not throw that away. That may be new physics. The cart before the horse may work. We just don't know.
Time's relative.
Just exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. The equation doesn't say which should come first. So that came about because Peter who is sadly gone. In fact, year after that, unfortunately, he got lung cancer and died within 6 months. It was just, and he was in incredibly good shape. So terribly tragic. And I'd worked with him for more than 10 years, kind of on and off on a freelance basis. But that came about because he, part of his deal, and I think this is common for kind of big anchor people on television, as part of his contract, he gets to have a department of his own, which makes documentaries that, the network, yes, has some say in whether it gets made, but it's really tremendously independent. It's like, for all the crap you're going to make me do, stories about, I don't know, Britney Spears, gossip and whatever, I'm going to have this thing that just, and it was basically like a PBS, and I also have worked on PBS type documentaries. It really was, and to the extent those guys are still there, Tom Yellen and Mark Obenhaus, and it's called Peter Jennings Reporting. I think it's now called the Documentary Group. Anyway, an amazing, they would spend, a lot of the stuff, even though I was in what we call the long form unit doing 1 or 2 hour documentaries, it wasn't nightly news or magazine stuff, but a lot of times we had to do it within a month. Sometimes if we were lucky, maybe 3-4 months, sometimes 6 months. In the Peter Jennings unit, whenever I got to work there, they had 1 year or 2 years. Really, it was just do it right when it's ready. And, it was, Peter had grown up, as the people of, the reporters of his generation had, growing up on like Edward R. Murrow and the great journalists. And he would often talk about wistfully about, when I started in television, that wasn't a crazy thing. CBS News would spend years on a story and then put it up when it's ready. But was he interested in that topic? Absolutely interested. Not in a. I think it's hard because he was a foreign correspondent. He actually was in Canada originally, and so really he was very, very, very steeped and very interested in politics and relations between groups. He had grown up in war zones, and I think the Munich Olympics had been like a formative experience for him covering that. Anyway, so he really was very, very, very hardcore issues of Earth and humans, human on human violence.
Which is why it was so epic when he did this, because you just like you said, I mean, it just went so outside of his resume where it was just like, wait a second,
so
why
here's
is he
what
even
happened.
doing this?
It didn't start out being called UFOs, Seeing is Believing, and it may or may not have included UFOs from the beginning, but the original title was Life in the Universe. And when I was approached to work on it, totally randomly, I happened to be visiting. I'm psyched if I get to talk to Avi Loeb at some point. I was actually at Harvard, had gone to Harvard on my own just to sit in for some SETI conference. And anyway, they called me just randomly. They said, hey, we're working on a show. It's kind of involves SETI and the search for the universe and NASA and all that. Follow the water was a big sort of slogan that NASA was using a lot, going to Mars and stuff. So would you want to work on that? And I was like, are you kidding? Absolutely. I'm going to get paid to do that? Yes, I'm there, So it's called Life in the Universe. And then it really was it wasn't an easy sell. Again, like I said, he probably could do whatever he wanted and put on the air whatever he wanted, but it wasn't an easy sell for the network. And so one point we were sitting there and they had interviewed Art Bell, and we were working on a story about the Phoenix Lights and things like that. And I remember he was sitting right next to me, and we were all screening in my little edit room. And in the interview, or somebody mentioned, wow, Art Bell had, I think at that time, 18 million viewers or something, like some giant number. Yeah. And he was like, I remember he was like, And he took out a little yellow sticky pad and he wrote down 18 million. He says, this will get those guys interested. Maybe I'll get those guys off the network, people off my back. I'll mention this. Next thing we know, the title is UFOs, Seeing is Believing.
Oh my God. I was going to say,
but I would say this,
like, what was the switch? How did that,
I don't want to I don't want to misrepresent that.
Before you answer that, Philip, Jazz Shaw just donated $20 to the show. Thank you so much, Jazz. Stop dodging, Philip. When do you interview Skinny Bob the alien, and when will that air?
The alien's name was actually P-Lod, P''L-O-D. And if you go watch the documentary, you will see that me and my silly coworkers on the show snuck in references to P-Lod throughout the program. So I did not get to meet Skinny Bob. I could have gone to him for diet tips, perhaps, I suppose.
Yeah, he's got his PR person's tough to get through, from what I understand.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hear that Skinny Bob isn't even his real name. I'm just saying, I don't know. It could be a handle. But I want to give a quick shout out, Jazz Shaw. I talk about, if you hadn't already, and this is by no means, this is actually not a plug for my podcast, but I did tell this story.
Plug away.
On the podcast, What the If, with you guys are Rather and Lewis and Michael are on the show. And I believe it's the one that's up right now, whattheif.com. And I tell the story of how there was another Mick West episode. And this is what really, I'd already come around almost immediately to loving you guys in this show. But there's one episode where not that long ago, you had Mick West on and Jazz Shaw was on. And by the end, you guys were like, we could have a beer together.
Right.
And then there was another, I'm not sure, I feel like it was a different show. And I go in depth in this, in the What the If episode that's up right now. And Jazz tells the story of how Lewis played some clips from the Alex Dietrich interview that she did with Mick West on his show. And, I enjoy Mick. I think what he does is really great. I have since learned that he's considered a bit of a troll online. So go for it, and proud of it, apparently. So rock on.
He's hilarious.
But I'm just a reporter here. But I got a whole new perspective on her through Jazz, how you described watching her and saying, you know what, I can tell you where she's come from. And it was very emotional. I know it was emotional for you and for everyone on the show. And Lewis, also, you played some clips of Alex. Anyway, I just took a totally new, different view. And I came away from that always believing that this idea of getting people together to speak on this topic, so-called skeptics and believers and the whole thing, is important and beneficial to everybody on both sides and to the world and maybe even other worlds. But that sense of like, hey, you got to take the time, as you guys do with your longer format, and listen to each other and understand where everybody's coming from, and then go and talk about UFOs or whatever. Anyway, I just found that so valuable, Jazz. You standing up for that and saying, listen to her, know her background, her experience, and you sharing your kind of connection to that. And anyway.
Yeah,
that was a great moment.
He's a huge friend of the show and a huge supporter of the Big Phone Home, which is coming up. And to your point, though, this conversation about long form and how it's so different, right? Because we talk about Twitter and we see, exactly what you were talking about earlier about Twitter. You see, 144 characters, you get an emotional reaction, you respond, and there's no depth of understanding between anybody who's having a conversation on that platform, whereas you get a long form conversation with people with different ideas. And we were Jazz was talking about this today, like, if you have the ability to understand where somebody's coming from and they have the ability to understand where you're coming from, you can glean so much more from that and have such a better understanding and actually do a service for other people, not just UFOs. There's so many other topics we can be doing this on, which I think is fantastic. And that's one of the things I loved about your show, though, What the If, is these thought experiments and how you're going through and, kind of letting scientists let their hair down and have these cool thought experiments. Yeah.
And I have to give a shout out to my co-host, Matt Stanley, Professor Matt Stanley, historian of science at New York University. He's actually I did a documentary about Einstein for the History Channel, and he was in that, and he's amazing. And by the way, just that notion, I didn't even know such a thing existed, a historian of science, but it also is like someone who's focused on the human side of it. You got to learn both. You do have to understand the science, but you have to understand the people that did it and how they came to do what they did for good or ill. So that's very powerful. And then we also have Gabby Panicia, who's a virologist, and an amazing time to have a virologist on the show. Yeah. And she's at Rockefeller University, which is, I think, a little known place actually outside of science, but it's here in New York City, and they, I think, literally have won more Nobel Prizes as a university than any other place in the world. So both of these people are exceptional science. They share their enthusiasm and their knowledge. And so it's a really fun show.
That's fantastic. So I have a question for you. I think Rather had a question too. I could always tell when Rather has a question because he's shaking his head like this and he's kind of opening his mouth a little bit. Yeah. But I'll let you ask your question in 1 second, Rather. But I have a question for you, Phillip. So this is something that, documentaries can be incredibly influential, right? It's an opportunity for a filmmaker to communicate a story, to communicate a message, and have influence on society. And I think it's a very important platform to do so. And I support it fully. But I do know there have been times when I've seen documentaries, and I wonder if they already had a conclusion prior to entering into the documentary, as opposed to honestly seeking to understand a topic or a concept or something. And so I'm curious, as an insider and as a documentary filmmaker, are there different types of documentary filmmakers who some are more journalistic and some are more sensationalistic, or like what is can you give us the inside scoop on that?
Yeah. It's not so much, I wouldn't say it's a scoop, but I would say, first of all, documentaries don't hurt people. People hurt people. So, don't blame the players. We're just
don't hate the player, hate the game. Documentaries an inanimate object.
Yeah. But I've done a lot of thinking about this, even just outside of any particular field or issue. But documentaries, I also I've taught documentaries for many years, documentary filmmaking. And the problem, documentary is actually not a genre. you know, you might as well just call it nonfiction, right? And so, as we know in literature or in books, nonfiction spans a vast, you know, array of things, including in when I was growing up, or even this happened to me just before I was growing up, and also when I was young. There was, I think at the time they called it new journalism, but Truman Capote wrote In Cold Blood, which, by the way, the movie is good, and there's a Philip Seymour Hoffman movie that was made many later years. That book, however, if you've never read the book In Cold Blood and you're at all interested in, say, true crime or just unbelievably powerful journalism, read that book. It's mind-blowing. It's horrifying. It's mind-blowing.
What's it called again?
But In Cold Blood.
In Cold Blood. Okay.
Truman Capote. He and what made it new was partly that it's a nonfiction book, but he didn't doesn't read like a newspaper article. It doesn't say, and then, you know, Chief Johnson said, and there's a quote, and da-da-da. It's just written like a novel in the sense that there's no interruption, you know. And but it's also kind of autobiographical. Truman Capote heard about this horrible murder, and he was a journalist. He decided, I'm going to write a story about this. And so this sounds so commonplace today, but at the time it was very unusual. The book is really him talking kind of to you or out loud, going through the experience of researching this thing. So he puts himself in the book, you know.
So it's almost like a documentary as a nonfiction book. It almost sounds that way. It's like a narration of the nonfiction.
Yeah, or even just like, again, if you saw this today, you'd be like, well, yeah, of course. You know, it's like how many documentaries, for instance, the podcast Serial, right? That was supposedly brought podcasting into the modern age, but those of us who know. It's like, what? No, we were here already. But you know, for anyone who listened to that, it's sort of like I forget her name, but the reporter who tells that story over many episodes. You know, it's recordings of her. It's like, here I am. I decided to call the alleged criminal, and here I'm going to talk to him in prison. And then you hear the interview, and then she'll come back and she'll say, yeah, it was really weird visiting. You know, she gives you her personal feelings.
Yeah.
So
radio. Have you ever listened to Radio Lab?
Of course. Yeah. And
yeah. Very similar, right?
Yeah. And I actually got to work a little bit at ABC with Robert Krulwich, which was amazing.
Oh, shut up. I'm so jealous.
Yeah. He's amazing. Boy, he's incredible. Brilliant person and filmmaker. Anyway, Truman Capote, you know, did this thing. And also Roots came out when I was quite young. Alex Haley wrote this book, Roots. And again, it was this thing, they call it historical fiction or something, you know, but it was this beginning blending. So it's just simply, what does it boil down to? Why I'm even saying this? It's just that documentary spans a wide range. People can have different tastes about how much blending there is acceptable to them. Errol Morris, when he did Thin Blue Line, used some reenactments in a way that was originally considered heretical. You can't do that in a documentary. Anyway, so there's a wide.
Reenactments are very much commonplace now, right?
Yeah, and so I started out. Actually, I worked at a kind of well-regarded documentary company called Maysles Films, and there had been two brothers, Albert and David Maysles. Unfortunately, only Albert was still around when by the time I got to work with them. They made Grey Gardens, if you ever saw that, or this documentary Salesman, Give Me Shelter with the Rolling Stones. They were among the beginners of the cinema verite or direct cinema, kind of the American, what we think of as documentaries, handheld cameras, going out in the street, making things. They started that in the 50s. They built their own cameras. First time you could carry a camera. Imagine, you could go outside and film things where they happened instead of bringing them into a studio. So, but Great. Some of the best documentaries you'll ever see. Go watch those. But Albert used to joke, and this is, let's say, in the early 90s, I was working there, mid to late 90s. And he said, oh, anytime you see footage of the Beatles arriving in the U.S., they filmed all that too. So that's
wait, what?
Yeah, so all the Beatles footage, and
yeah, that's wild.
They did lots of. I'm not like them. I don't not even near their talent and importance.
Stop
but
it.
I kind of model. Well, I just kind of model. I was like that. They did this thing of finding fascinating people, and it didn't matter. They were sort of democratic about who it was. They did films about Marlon Brando, but then they also did films about someone doing incredible work in poverty in Louisiana and things like that.
Right.
So, or the Rolling Stones, whatever. He would say, you know, we started doing this and we thought someday movies are going to be like this. You know, that it will, this nonfiction thing will weave its way into the regular flow of movies. And you'll go to, just like you go to the bookstore, you see books, fiction books, and you also see nonfiction books. And it never quite, you know, documentaries are a thing. They were famous, but, you know, never quite got. And they said, you know, when we were doing documentaries for the news, the network news things at the time, you know, they would do these Peter Jennings type things that I was working on. They someday it'll take over, you know. And then reality TV came around. And some years later, Albert is just saying, man, be careful what you wish for.
Right.
There was a period there. It was like, it's happening. No, don't do that.
Damn. Damn.
There goes the dream. Bottom line, I'd say, unfortunately, yeah. So now it's just so diverse. You know, I'll tell you something I need to look into. I'm very interested in looking into him, and a documentary filmmaker, and I do not know much about him at all. I hear his name all the time. You guys, I'm sure, know it. Maybe you literally know him personally. But Jeremy Corbell, right?
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
I'm only at the stage here where it's like his stuff is winding up on the news, and they say documentary filmmaker Jeremy Corbell. I've looked at. I haven't had time to sit down and really watch a lot of his stuff at length. I've watched a little bit of it, and I'm kind of like, I'm uneasy because I'm like, really, documentary filmmaker in my mind. But this is totally uneducated. I'm saying it right now, and I really want to look into it seriously. Look at it again. Take it fairly. Don't want to misjudge. But it feels like there's an example. I feel like of somebody coming at it with a pretty strong. I mean, he's an activist, right? So let's say this: there is the activist strain of documentaries, and there are Michael Moore, for totally different kinds of things. There's no bones about the fact that this is how he feels.
Right. Yeah. Wow.
But we aren't all that way. That Peter Jennings documentary on UFOs, I really do think, it's not because I worked on it, but say what you want, is one of the most serious looks at the phenomenon. One of the times that the highest of highest journalistic people and organizations spent time on it. I know there are people that may be very upset, perhaps, at some of the outcomes, but man, they took it seriously. They were like, we are not. So to your question, Lewis, about did he come away feeling positive or negative? He's not here to defend himself, so I hope I get this right. But I think that he would say, and the producers I worked with and myself came away feeling, it was to me, one of the best investigations of the Roswell thing. Now, there may be new things that have come out since, but kind of felt like Roswell is pretty well explained as it was a secret balloon thing, and that's what that was. We have interviews in that show with one of the heads of Project Blue Book, Robert Friend, who I believe he was maybe the head of it before Hynek. And he just tells us, he's like, our job was to get it out of the papers. That was our job. And we show you how absurd the government statements were, as I think they still are. You know, we show things like ducks or this. It's like, no, these Air Force pilots did not see ducks. You know, or Venus did not show up, a star did not show up on radar. You know, and so, but the spectrum of the show, I would say, is we cover a lot of topics. Roswell, Peter felt, a lot of people felt like, that's a pretty good explanation. I hate to call it debunking. It's just sort of, that's an explanation. Phoenix Lights, total mystery. I am still so baffled by that, and have become more re-baffled, sort of watching. You guys have been talking about it, and I've been going back and watching some of the videos of that again. Abductees, really complex. Those people actually, the experiencers, as they're now called, I think, those we actually did a lot of those interviews actually in the office even. So I got to meet them and talk about them, hear what they had to say. It's a really hard thing to do because we really spent time on the story of John Mack, and I think we did a nice job there. And I was even watching recently somewhere on YouTube. There's better, even more beautiful, 60 Minutes or something. Some nice stuff. So that I think it's hard to talk about that honestly for me within the UFO zone. It's very much about hypnosis, and I do think there were leaders, Bud Hopkins, who I got to meet and went to some of his sessions, and we got to watch him do hypnosis sessions. he really struck me as a really sincere, beautiful soul. Sadly, not around anymore.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it was, I don't know how scientific it was. David Jacobs, and I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn, whatever, but he really struck me as kind of phony. I mean, just some of it, when I look at the uncut footage of him doing some of these sessions, it was like, oh, this is just like crazy. It fell into the reality TV territory.
Really?
Right.
Whereas Bud, I thought was really sincere. I don't know if what Bud was doing was 100%. I don't know the science of hypnosis, but
Right.
I'm sorry. Abductees which was a chapter that one of the chapters I edited. So I spent a lot of time on that. We do bring it around to sleep apnea, sleep paralysis.
Right.
And we have these other scientists at Harvard also who came on, and it was pretty interesting, but a really good example, I would say, of, I'll wrap it up here so I don't spin out of control, just in terms of your questions, but.
Oh, not at all.
On What the If, this episode, you guys, we were talking about Mick West, and for instance, that I really do think that Mick West, his explanation of, let's say, the glare, he does a demonstration of, well, maybe what we're seeing on the gimbal, right? There's some glare, and that maybe the thing that looked, the Tic Tac UFO may not actually be rotating. And I do think it's possible that the pilot who you hear kind of, getting excited on the radio and may have been misinterpreting in that moment that the UFO was rotating. Okay. So you can go drill down and say, yes, boy, that's a really solid explanation. On the other hand, what the hell is it?
Exactly.
Something is there.
Right.
Something is there. And now that becomes a separate topic. So I believe sleep paralysis is absolutely real. I've experienced it, and maybe you guys have too. It's this thing where you wake up and you're not fully awake. And so apparently when you're asleep and you're dreaming, your body kind of goes into paralysis to prevent you from acting out your dream or, whatever, running around.
Right.
And you can wake up and still have that. And you have a sensation. It goes back to ancient times, a sensation of people looking at you. I think that's, but there's so much. I'm not coming down on one side or the other on this, but I will say with the abductees, it goes so far beyond that. Like so much of as they tell it, now I was just saying, as they tell it, they're talking about times that had nothing to do with them just waking up,
Right.
These are long episodes, but I think
And
it's
this is and this is what we talk about all the time about, people who have had these experiences. We had Ted Rowe on Monday and Tuesday. And this guy explaining his experience, like, you get goosebumps just listening to it. And it's like, it's so outside of the sleep paralysis, but
also, well, I was going to say, he's at the same time, he's not just a guy, he also runs the National Aviation Collection Data Center, for all of these aviation pilots that report UFOs. And now the AIAA, which is the avionics, what is it, Michael? What's the acronym? Aeronautics and aviation.
And,
anyway,
like
it's where they come and have a conference every year about flight safety and planes and new rules and all of the things that the FAA adheres to.
American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics.
Thank you very much. And he's speaking at that event,
right?
And then he comes on the show and he tells you, yeah, I've seen these things right in front of my face. It's hard to be like, yeah, you're crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I'll just make one sentence statement just so everyone understands. Where do I actually just stand on this? I think that I also edited the what I called the SETI chapter, but there's one chapter in that Peter Jennings documentary where it's really like here scientists are going to talk, and so we talked to Neil Tyson. I think Michio Kaku is in there too. Michio Kaku appears throughout, and Seth Shostak and Jill Tarter from SETI and stuff like that. And I really do stand by Neil Tyson's thing about like eyewitness testimony, unfortunately. And this is the hardest thing for people outside of science to understand.
Yep.
And you have to be so delicate talking about it because eyewitness testimony is the thing that makes you so passionate, let's say, because it's you, right?
Right.
But Neil Tyson says, look, eyewitness testimony is beautiful, but we just can't use it in science because.
Well, it's the reason why we have the standard we do is because of Neil deGrasse Tyson. I can't take my personal story to the congressman or a senator. Same thing with Ted Rose's story. And that's why, you know, when they had this conference, they're like, we're keeping the little green men part out of this. Like, we're not talking about it. This is not what this is about. This is literally a flight safety issue, you know? So, and that these things are there, they're in the sky and you need to know about it. Like, and so for me, yeah, I agree with Neil deGrasse Tyson on that front. These personal stories, as compelling as they are, they're not science. They're not data, unless, you know, but I do hate the damn example where he's like, yeah, just grab a trinket off the shelf in the craft, or, you know, take the cup holder, or you know, whatever. Like it's some soccer mom's, you know, freaking Jeep, you know, like give me a break. You know, like you know, like there's no.
I wouldn't do that in a soccer
space candy in one of these things.
I'd be afraid of the soccer mom. I wouldn't be stealing trinkets out of her.
No, hell no, I wouldn't.
That soccer mom
dangerous. Who abducted you? I've been abducted by soccer moms. You know, right from my crazy. It's a crazy experience. I was made to play soccer against my.
I think it's so valid, right? Because when you're talking about personal eyewitness testimony, that's why we do this bias game here, right? Every week, because it's like everyone has personal bias. There are always logical fallacies, and we have to be aware of that. And we can't use subjective experience as science, but we can still be compassionate and listen to these people. That's the point I wanted to make.
And I do ask that they do the same.
Yeah,
it really goes both ways. It really goes.
Yeah, more and more in the legal system, they're backing away from eyewitness testimony. They're saying that so many people have been convicted, and it's shaky.
That's tragic, horrible.
Yeah,
horrifying.
Neil says the same thing. He talks about how eyewitness testimony in the court of law is the least compelling form of evidence. Least compelling form of evidence.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's
problem
impossible
is
to verify, right?
Yeah,
possible to verify, but I think, you know, a lot of the skeptics, what they kind of miss is that, you know, there are obviously some big mysteries of life, right? And dreams and consciousness are among them. So, you know, when people have these crazy experiences, you know, I'm not a big believer necessarily in things like astral plane and remote viewing, but I mean, it's impossible to just throw those out of hand, you know. They're interesting, you know, ideas that
I want to put
at
least some consideration.
Yeah. There's a documentary about the amazing Randy that a close friend of mine made called An Honest Liar. And it's an amazing film. And James Randi was really the creator of the modern skeptic movement, formalized as such. Right? He was a magician who then came to feel that hucksters, not saying anyone but in this UFO world is that, but like he was looking at people who, you know, magicians who would, when he was younger, he was a Houdini of his age. But he started to see that there were the credo of the magician, and this Penn and Teller are really amazing, devoted disciples of his and James Randi's method. But James Randi said that, you know, a magician's job was to say, this is a trick. I'm not using magic powers. That for him, you know, I don't know if Houdini had also said that, but that was the point. We want to show you this is about misdirection, and I'm going to do it, and you're going to wonder how I did it, but I did it. Oh, what is that?
No, you keep talking. I was trying to share this with a listener while you were talking. Sorry. Yeah, you're.
Oh, there we go.
24 logical fallacies.
And that he was angry that there were magicians essentially, you know, tricking people using the training they got from another magician or a great book or whatever, and trying to pretend that they were magical people, psychic, or whatever it was. So he was out to do that, and then. The fascinating thing is you were talking about remote viewing. Anyway, for those who don't know, look into how he sent in magicians in to be test subjects. The scientists didn't know that they were coming in to sort of mess with them or test their methods, and proved that you could fake the situation. Anyway, you could make it look like you really were doing a remote viewing, and then he would say, "We're trained. This is training. I can show you how to do this." So you need to take that into account. Look, if you can actually do remote viewing, man, you should do it. And we should be, we should
studying it and studying you and trying to understand how it's done. But at the same time, there will always be tricksters. Yes,
there are people who will. Yeah,
absolutely. NAP with a $5 donation. Witnesses can't make the conclusion, but it should spur a real investigation. Completely agree.
Well, not just witnesses, I would say, but the people who are. It's just something we want to know. It's as simple as like, I believe we should go to Mars. Like you could ask me to make all kinds of intellectual argument as to why we should. I could kind of give you that, but I don't know. I just like, yeah, we should do that. And so people want to know. That should be enough even for the government to take action.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, the problem, it's hard for people to let go of eyewitness testimony. Yeah, and even the courts, right? Because for basically since the beginning of time, we've been relying on eyewitness testimony. We haven't had DNA result testing or, all of these fancy gadgets that break down things to a microscopic level where we can definitively say now, okay, this person killed this person. And the eyewitness testimony also corroborates what happened, because it's like, part of me is like, well, what about me witnessing 9/11? Did I get it wrong? Like, don't I not remember it correctly? Like it was something that impacted my memory. Now I bet for sure 100% there are details I will get wrong.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like
all of the day. But the day itself, I'll never forget that day. I'll never forget what happened. You
guys ever seen Brain Games?
Brain Games. Oh, on TV. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the amount of like, illusory misguidance that your brain offers you so often is truly extraordinary and compelling.
Yeah. Well, which
I had an experience, by the way. I don't know if we have time.
Oh, yeah, but I was going to say real quick.
We do have time.
Which is why I don't understand why Mick West is so caught up on the time difference between these two pilot testimonies, because this happened 15, 16 years ago. Like, and Fravor says, well, he was looking at it for 10 minutes, but Dietrich says she only saw it for what? For rather, was it like 30 seconds, 10 seconds, something like that. So there's this huge time difference, which is big, but it's like, can we allow for things like that when we're hearing stories from these credible people? Like these highly trained professionals. Please, I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
Well, for instance, another part of the profound just things that I took away from working on that Peter Jennings documentary was another chapter that I edited. Is amazing. It's the story of, at the time, before all the David Fravor and this whole modern thing came out with the Navy. One of the best stories, or most compelling stories, was many people on board a B-52 or some large military plane up out of Minot, North Dakota. Minot, North or South Dakota, big base there, and they were flying, and something appeared on their radar. I think it was a cloudy night, maybe, but something appeared on the radar. And here's the amazing thing: this is back in the 60s. I think this is actually in Project Blue Book. And in fact, people went to the archives and made high resolution photocopies and brought back of the actual handwritten testimonies given to, including sketches, and it was given to Project Blue Book. So, and I got to hold these. These are sacred documents. This is bizarre. But anyway, something appeared on the radar, a dot, because it's one of these spinning things. And they started taking pictures of it. They just film camera. I was like, wow, that's amazing, right? No one ever has a picture. Here we go. And at a time where it wasn't easy to do. So they started taking pictures of this thing. And you can just see it no matter what they did. There is the thing. And you have these guys, the navigator, whoever who we interview and are telling you the whole story. It's super compelling. They're like, no matter what we could do, we couldn't shake this thing. And then suddenly it would disappear and suddenly appear on the other side. When it would get close, we would the radio would go out. And there are transcripts of the, unfortunately, I didn't think we had audio of the talk between them and the tower, but there's transcripts of it from the time. And you can see, radio goes out and stuff, then comes back. Anyway, that's all it was this, but it was this dot on the radar. No visible sightings. So I'm listening to this whole story. I'm like, wow, that's just highly compelling. We have no idea what it is. Radar is the hardest. I need to learn more about radar. I don't know what that was. But then the captain says, just as they were landing, he saw a light off to his left. So he banked the plane around. And this is as he tells it to us and had told many people. He looked out the window and he saw a gigantic alien craft glowing hovering just above the ground. Okay. And that's exactly how he described it. So, all right. Kind of bizarre. Now there's all these other people on the plane too, right? So the person who interviewed them asked, did you see it? Did you see it? Did you see it? And they all, they didn't make any uncomfortable faces, but they were just like, no, I didn't see it. So the co-pilot, like there's a giant, enormous glowing thing and you just pass it and then you just go land. Anyway, that part of it seemed aberrant to me. Then this is my own personal sleuthing. Take it for what you will, but I looked at the drawings he had made and listened to his description. He describes it as a large crescent-shaped section. It was a two-part ship he described. Large crescent-shaped section that he says, I knew that was the command part of the ship. Totally weird thing to say, right? Okay. And he said behind it, there was like maybe a connecting sort of tube or rod or something. And behind it was a large oblong section. And I felt that's where the storage was. But now you look at the drawing he made. And I was like, And then I just thought, what's the date of this incident? And I look it up and I say, and this is not a crazy thing because people do this all the time. Well, what was on TV at the time? Right?
Yeah.
Because the Hill, the Betty and Barney Hill,
yeah.
Some testimony like, well, this show was on TV, the aliens, just like they described. So anyway, what was on TV? Well, I mean, within like a very close time period to when he was saying this, Star Trek had its premiere. And this shit, you're like, oh, there's the Enterprise.
Right.
So the most generous interpretation of this, and actually I saw somebody, one of the quotes you popped up from someone in the chat, said, just because something can be faked doesn't mean it can't also be real.
Right.
Absolutely. So the most generous interpretation of this you can make is that for some reason the other people didn't see it and they didn't look. So, okay, I don't know why. It's all weird, but hey. And that he saw this thing he didn't understand and he projected on it some model based on Star Trek or science fiction, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the most generous thing. However, there's a lot of questions raised by that. So I came away feeling, I just said this, just listening to him, wonderful guy. I think Runyon was his name, I believe, Brad Runyon, the pilot. Honestly, here's what I took away from that. He struck me as a dreamer, and and I think David Fravor has this too. I'm not saying this as a criticism, but if you listen to the full 4-hour interview he does with Lex Friedman, I think David Fravor does, right? They're human beings, right? And man, like all of us, they wanted to be fighter pilots. So you got a little bit of Luke Skywalker in you. Right. You're looking at the two suns on the horizon and thinking, there's amazing things happening I want to be part of, right? Things I don't even understand. So all that just comes around to say, this is why eyewitness testimony gets very, very, very difficult. And let's say they saw something, but to go any further, the only thing we can really do is look at hard evidence. At least that allows us to say, let's try to find some other interpretation for it. If we can.
Right. Or you could ask for more data, right?
From our congressmen and our senators, perhaps.
We could ask for a little bit more data on those particular things since they're already public. I mean, what's the harm in giving us a little more data so scientists like Phillip Shane can look at it?
Phillip, do you got to rush out of here, or can you stick around for next guest?
I would love to stick around. Sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Fantastic. Yeah. Well, we've got an amazing guest coming on for you all right now. Dr. Irena Scott was a professor of biology at Bonaventure University and author. She was a correspondent for Popular Mechanics, as well as participated in UFO investigations for the Defense Intelligence Agency and the Center for UFO Studies. Dr. Scott, how are you?
Okay.
Can you hear us all right?
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, it's amazing to have you. I really appreciate. I know you were not feeling well and you had the flu, and you still stuck around and came and joined us, and I really appreciate that.
Well, I'm glad I'm here.
Fantastic. So would you mind sharing with folks kind of how you got into studying and investigating and writing books and working with the DIA on UFOs?
It's a long story. Being a female, I wasn't exactly welcomed in science, but I went into science anyway.
Good
and
for you.
got my PhD from a veterinary college and worked in biology. I started out in astronomy, and it was male only. And I wasn't even allowed to apply. I was sort of kicked out of the room when I tried to apply to astronomy jobs, so I went into something else. And I always had an interest in astronomy, but I started out, I didn't go around saying I'm interested in UFOs for obvious reasons, because I was usually the only female wherever I was in a science position.
Right.
But my sister and I had sort of a experience with UFOs when we were really young, and some later. And eventually I came out of the closet and said, yeah, we have something to do with UFOs. And it started when she was about 4 and I was maybe 6. And we were very poor. We were living in an old farm house and sleeping on 2 sides of an attic room. And we'd never heard of UFOs or space people or telescopes or aliens or anything else. I mean, the media didn't influence us. All we had was a radio, and our parents had just bought that. And, after we got electricity. And so the first experience I had was I woke up and there was this thing flying around the room. And I wondered what on earth it was. It looked like a little piece of metal. It was small and it sort of looked like heated iron or something. And it was just sort of buzzing around like it was inspecting things. It didn't turn off or on. And it got close to me and it got close to my sister several times. And
this was inside the house?
Yeah.
Or inside the...
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And we were on an isolated farm. There were, horses going down the road and things like that. This was at night, and there wasn't really any traffic or anything. And I'd never seen anything like it, and I couldn't imagine what it was. And it wasn't anything like a lightning ball, or a lightning bug is what I meant to say. And so it flew around for a while. And I began to notice that it knew where the furniture was. And it would come to a wall, and it'd be going toward the wall, and then it'd veer. And it'd go towards furniture and go around the furniture and stuff. So it didn't behave like, it behaved like something alive. But I couldn't figure out what on earth it was. And I just curious. And I didn't know my sister was awake, but she was awake too. And so after a while, it flew up toward the ceiling, but it didn't hit the ceiling. It flew up there and then it turned and it went over to a chandelier. And it was an attic room, and the walls slanted upwards and came together in the ceiling. And there was a little bit of space in between the chandelier and the walls. And so it went over the chandelier, which was turned off, and began to circle it. And it circled and circled and circled. And then it came down sort of in a spiral under the chandelier. And both my sister, I didn't realize until then, my sister knew it was there too. And we both just became terrified and started shrieking and tried to get out of the room so fast we fell down the stairs and went shrieking to our parents. And they told us we were crazy and we didn't see it. And
wow,
we used to go back upstairs, and we didn't, and said, we're going to beat you up. And we still didn't go.
And nobody listens to kids. No.
But that was my first experience. And
that is wild. And so so was it appeared to be a physical object, a light, a glow, plasma? Like what sort of qualities did it have? Do you remember?
It looked physical. It looked like a little piece of iron. It looked like a little piece of real hot iron that was glowing. It was just real small, like it was maybe shaped like a cough drop or about that size. Oh. And it glowed, but it was just like a little piece of metal.
That's wild. And so this is what originally, and this is something that you and your sister, that's an experience you both shared. You both saw the same thing. Does she still, like, did you guys talk about this when you were adults, and you both still remembered it the same?
Yeah, we didn't we didn't associate with UFOs until much, much, much later, because many years later, Jenny Randles published a book about UFOs and about children's experience with UFOs, and sometimes they see them in their bedroom, little UFOs. And then later they'll grow up and see UFOs as adults, sometimes if they are in that same category. Well, we didn't know what it was. And finally, when I read Jenny Randles' book many years later, I thought, yeah, that's what we saw. But we discussed it with my mother that morning. And then a lot of the family heard about it and they were sort of scared. And one of my cousins wouldn't even go in the room. And what was weird was if one of us had seen it, well, nobody'd believe us. I mean, they'd say you're dreaming. But it was two of us, and we weren't even talking to each other, and we didn't have a media experience with UFOs or anything else. We were just there, and it happened. And yes, my sister, fortunately, remembered it, and we both wrote reports eventually. So, and we remember, I mean, we were very young, and she was probably about 4. But we remember, in general, the same thing. I think she sort of remembered it as being white, and I sort of remembered it as being iron colored and things like that. But over the years, we'd remember a little bit differently.
Right. That's wild. So is this what got you into, because you were a volunteer astronomer at Ohio State University Radio Observatory, the Big Ear, which is where the WOW SETI signal was found. Was this experience something that drove you into the sciences to be, you know, a layman astronomer? Like, was this experience pivotal for you in moving in that direction?
I don't know, because I just always wanted to be an astronomer, and I applied. That's what got me into the DIA in satellite photography, and it's what got me into volunteer astronomy. But I couldn't apply back then because it was male only. So I did something else and got married and had a family and all that. But when I got the chance to volunteer to be an astronomer, I was there.
You were all in. That's fantastic. You wrote a book called UFOs, or contribute. I don't know if did you write this yourself, or you were a contributor to a book called UFOs Today: 70 Years of Lies, Disinformation, and Government Cover-Ups?
Yes, I wrote it.
Yeah, can you give us kind of an overview or a summary of that work?
Yeah, I covered the subject of UFOs more or less chronologically, and I tried to start at the beginning of the modern time in UFOs. And today, most people think that Roswell is the beginning of UFOs. And actually, nobody ever heard of Roswell until about 1980 or so, when a book was published by Stanton Friedman and another person. The UFO idea started in 1947 with Kenneth Arnold. And just by luck, once I was in a bookstore and was looking at all these glamorous books with colors and everything. And I saw an old drab book and I bought it and took it home. And it turned out to be the original book by Kenneth Arnold, which after I'd marked it up and everything, I discovered this was antique. But he told about the things that happened to him. And I don't know if people have read his original book. He made the original sighting that made the newspapers and everything in 1947 before Roswell. And he reported 9 objects, but he had all these really weird things happen to him too. He was asked by this science fiction writer to go investigate UFOs. And he didn't know the guy was a science fiction writer or anything. He just decided to go and took off one day in his plane. He was a pilot, and a very good pilot, and flew a very complex airplane, and on search and rescue meeting things like that. But so he went to do exploring of the UFOs to examine some information, and he found a airline pilot who had also observed 9 objects and looked like the ones he saw. And so he combined with the airline pilot to investigate this thing. And it was considered a hoax. It was called the Murray Island event. But I found some really odd things about it. It was purported to be a hoax by just 2 people who said they were boat, I forget what, Coast Guard or something. And this one man said he was out in his ship with his son and his dog, and this UFO came over and dropped some material on him, and the material injured his son and killed his dog and things, and that was considered a hoax. But what was really strange about it was that when Kenneth Arnold got to the town in, I think it was Tacoma, Washington, to investigate and met the person, well, he had not told anybody he had taken off in his airplane to fly there. And when he landed, he found that all the hotels were filled up and he couldn't find any place to stay. So finally, just on a lark, he called the most expensive hotel in town, and it turned out there was a reservation for him. And he thought, well, there's this reservation is for some other Kenneth Arnold, but he would take it and then talk to the other Kenneth Arnold when he showed up. Well, the other Kenneth Arnold never showed up. Something you would get suspicious of, pretty fast. And then in a hotel directory, he found the name of the man he was supposed to talk to. And this man told him to get out, don't have anything to do with UFOs, they're dangerous, stay away, which wasn't, what he was expecting, because the guy was supposed to be a part of a hoax. And so anyway, the man said that after he had had this experience, that this man had come and told him all about his experience and told him everything, even though he was on a boat by himself, and then told him not to talk about it. Well, that was very strange too, because it was like the Men in Black, but nobody had ever heard of the Men in Black in 1947.
Right.
This sounded very strange too. And it just kept going. And so these 2 government people, I forget their positions, had contacted Kenneth Arnold before. And when he had first written to Wright Patterson, and they had told him about some photography of UFOs and things, and they had this one man had told him not to call him at his office, which I think was at I can't remember, a big Air Force base in California. I can't remember the name of it now. But anyway, then Kenneth Arnold thought he's over his head in this because of the hotel and everything else. And he would call these 2 government people who seemed friendly and helpful. They were named Brown and Davidson, captain, I think, and I forget what the other one was. But, and so they came. And they flew in, and for some reason they had their plane monitored when it was on the ground. And so Arnold had these other weird experiences, and one of them was this man was going to show him the things that the UFO purportedly dropped, which people considered a fake. But he invited Arnold to his secretary's house, and Arnold came, and it looked like a secretary's house, and it had the particles in it, or the rocks or whatever, and it looked like a normal house. It had a piano in it, and the secretary was at the table sorting out papers and things, and everything looked normal. And so he showed Arnold the rocks and showed him a box of rocks. And Arnold came home that night. And then the next day he decided to go look at the house again. So he went to look at the house again. and the house was, it looked like nobody had ever been there for years. The door was covered with cobwebs and everything else, and you couldn't imagine what happened. And to me, it sounded like an abduction, but it was way back in 1947 before anybody heard of anything like that. And then later he was to, he talked to another government person who said it was all a hoax and everything, and the rocks weren't real or anything, but these people had wanted him to move this box of the rocks, of the samples, into the government person's airplane. And he lifted the box of rocks and said they didn't look anything like the man had showed him. And he thought they were way too heavy. And he moved them in the airplane. And then the airplane, the government people took off, and their plane crashed. And there had been this man that seemed to be reporting everything that was said in Arnold's room to a newspaper. And I mean, and they had looked for I think they called it a dictaphone back then, but looked for some type of a bug or something, which you'd call now. And I think back in those days, they thought it was a big thing. And this, even when everybody was there, he would report to the newspaper what was going on in their room. And that sounded fishy to me, like, they'd set up the room and the government maybe had some way to wire the room. And so then the airplane took off and it crashed and everybody died. And
oh my God.
Yeah. And this whatever you call him, that was giving the verbatim accounts of what was going on in the room, said, well, this was because there was evidence of UFOs and the UFOs were destroying it, which, the whole thing was just like somebody had set up Arnold to make him look stupid or something. It didn't really work because he was very intelligent and he asked for help for other people and got the government involved, except the government people got killed. And so that I found out that from his book.
That is wild.
People knew much about it. I don't think people read his book after Roswell came out, especially. Roswell happened about a couple of weeks after Arnold reported seeing the UFOs. And the government had then contacted, Arnold had written to Wright-Patterson saying, what's going on here? This is something very unusual, which is a logical thing to do because he was a pilot. He knew what he saw. And then Roswell happened, but it was sort of covered up. And the government didn't contact Arnold until several weeks after that. And nobody ever mentioned Roswell to Arnold at all. So it was pretty weird.
That's incredible.
Go for it, Mike.
So quickly, I wanted to, and then you guys can ask some questions, but I've got John Russell here with a $20 donation who says, I hope Irena can update us on any recent experiences before we run out of time. Irena, have you had any other experiences since childhood that you'd like to share?
I've had several, and one of them was with my sister again. And so far as I know, we're the only two people that had an experience when we were kids and when we were adults both, which sort of fit into the Jenny Randall's idea. But it was when I was working for the Defense Intelligence Agency in Washington. I had a real high clearance. It was one of the highest in the government was for satellite photography. And my job was, at that time, was in a section called Air Order of Battle. And I was supposed to identify aircraft from satellite photography. And so I was sort of experienced in aircraft and photography both. But I was supposed to kind of disappear because it was real high security classification. Well, my sister was at Drew University in New Jersey, and we had grown up in Ohio, but we were both on the East Coast then. And so we decided to go up and see the New England states. And it was just a vacation. We didn't have any other plans, but I picked her up and I took two men I worked with the DIA up and they wanted to see New York and left them out. And they met my sister and I took some pictures of them and things. And my sister and I drove on up and we were going to stay at Boston, but we got there and it was still daylight. And so we traveled on up around the whatever you call it, the freeway that went around Boston and then up into New Hampshire. And I found out later we were in part of the place where the Hill, Betty and Barney Hill experience happened. I don't know if that had to do with anything, but we didn't know anything about hills then either. And I, of course, didn't say anything about UFOs because I was in my job. You didn't go around saying UFOs there.
Your job is to identify aircraft from satellites. You may want to not be talking about UFOs at the time. I get it.
No, that was definitely not something I do. Anyway, we were planning to stay in Boston, and I drove back into Boston and looked for motels, and everything seemed to be filled up. And somebody said to go around the outer belt and look for a place. And so we were leaving Boston, and we hadn't ever talked about UFOs very much. In fact, we never told each other we'd seen UFOs. And there was a airport south of us as we were driving out of Boston. We could see the airplanes coming in. It was called Norwood Memorial Airport, and it was for small airplanes. And we could see the airplanes coming in, and you could see their red and green wing lights, and see their landing lights when they landed. Right. And everything looked normal, except there was this one bright light that seemed to be lower than the rest of them. It was blinking. It was all white without any other colors. And my sister kept saying, "This is odd." After a while, she was saying, "Maybe it's a UFO." And I told her she was crazy, that if it was a UFO, well, you know, the newspapers would be out taking pictures and the police would be out and everything. And she kept saying, "This is odd." And I kept laughing at her and telling her she was crazy and telling her it was a helicopter, although it didn't look anything like a helicopter to me either. And so anyway, we were kind of arguing about it. And I was trying to look for the motel, and she kept looking at this thing and saying, "This is odd." And then we both admitted to each other that we'd seen UFOs before, which we'd never done. And then I was driving on Route 95, which is the main freeway north and south along the coast. It was also called Route 1, I think, in places. But I passed this woods, and there was this sphere in the woods that was sort of like a round piece of glass, and you could see lights in it. And the lights were going through a spectrum of red and blue, and would blend in just all shades of red and all shades of blue. And I thought, what on earth is that thing? And then the inside of our car lit up in green. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. And I looked around, the thing I saw wasn't green, and I couldn't see green anyplace else except inside my car. And I thought, what on earth is going on? And so the green went away after a while in the car, and we kept on, and we were arguing. And I was bitten by mosquitoes, and I wanted to find a hotel. And she kept saying, "Look at that." And so anyway, then finally she started screaming at me to stop because it was going over the road, and I wasn't even watching it. So after she screamed a while, I decided to stop. And I looked out the window, and I saw a meteor way off in the distance. And I pointed at it, and I was going to say, "Dingbat, that's a helicopter." Then it came over the road, and I realized I was a dingbat, and she was right. Wow. What we saw was this thing that was hanging low over the road. It went very slow. It had 7 things that looked like windows, and these things were blinking in a sequence and had 2 lights on the end that didn't blink. They were very dim. One was red and one was green, and it went perpendicular to our line of sight. And we looked at it, and it made no sound whatsoever. And we've seen lots of blimps with like signs on their sides and things like that. I even have a YouTube channel and have pictures of blimps with lighted sides. And we looked at it, and we were just comparing and said, "Do you hear anything?" And she said, "No," and no. And we saw it, and it had this blinking pattern of like the first 3 lights would go on and off twice, and all 7 go off and on once, and then the last 3, and then it'd repeat the cycle. And so anyway, we were discussing, are those windows or panels? And we both thought they were windows. We both thought we were looking in windows, but there was nothing inside. And it was just real bright light. And so anyway, I had I had several cameras with me, and I had a Polaroid with high-speed film, and I was in photography anyway, due to the DIA. And so I thought, oh, this is going to be an amazing picture. And I had the camera in the trunk and the other thing and the film in the back seat or something. They found them, and I was loading the film in the camera, and the thing was right up there where you could see it. And
you said it was moving slowly?
It was moving very, very slowly.
Very slowly, okay.
And, you know, being in photography, I thought this will be an amazing picture because you can take, you know, a time exposure or something. And if I can get it so you can enhance the background, I could get, you know, the lights and the object and some background, maybe if I had, you know, if I got a time exposure and things like that, which I could do with that Polaroid. And so I just got the camera ready, and I was just going to take this amazing picture. And the truck driver came over, and he stopped and walked up, and I thought, oh, this is nice. We'll have another witness. And the truck driver came over, and my sister was on one side of me looking at the object, and the truck driver stood right beside me and said, "What are you doing?" And this thing was up there in the sky, and I didn't say UFO around the truck driver or anything. He was a man, and I was scared of him and things. And so I pointed at it and said, "What's that?" like it was an airplane. And he just rotated around, looked in the opposite direction, and said, "I don't see anything." Then he rotated back around, looked at me, and said, "What are you doing?" or something like that. And I pointed again. And he rotated in exactly the opposite direction from where I was pointing and said, "I don't see anything." And then he turned back around, looked at me, and he kind of pointed to his head like I was crazy and went back to his truck. And then I had my camera ready, but it was a lot farther away by then, the object was. My sister said she said that around the time I was taking my picture that it seemed to get from one place to another place, just all of a sudden. And she said it had been doing that it would appear one place and then appear other place. And she said at that time, and I didn't notice it because I was so intent on taking the picture, but I thought I have a real high sensitive, it was a 300 ASA film for my camera, which was pretty sensitive. And I was afraid I'd get lens flares if I was on the freeway. So it was a hill there. And I decided to run up the hill. And my sister started telling me not to do that. And she said I was running toward the object. And I didn't understand because I kept telling her that there was this man there that might take over the car. But anyway, I went up the hill and took the picture. And it was the picture turned out really weird later. But then I came back down. And the object went to the airport and it started circling. And we could see it circling the airport, and it would blink its lights at a certain sequence all around as it circled the airport. And it would go from north to south and blink its lights on twice. South to north, it would go so fast you couldn't even see it. And then it'd be south and it'd blink north again. And it kept circling and circling. And so I thought I just missed a beautiful, wonderful picture. I mean, I had a security clearance and everything else, but this was phantastic photographically. And so I thought it might go to the north, and we were a little bit south of it. And so I was going to go to the next exit and turn around and come back.
So can I hold you one second? I was just curious about this man. So when you told him, when you pointed at the object, he did not follow your trajectory of where you were pointing, and he looked somewhere else, and then he told you were crazy?
Yeah.
That's so bizarre. I can't. That's so
pretty
bizarre.
wild.
Yeah,
Well,
go on. I'm sorry. That's just wild.
This gets more bizarre.
Yay!
I got on the freeway to turn around, and the truck driver, the same bizarre man, got right behind me, turned these bright lights, got right on my bumper, and began to follow me. And I switched lanes several times. I slowed down, I speed up, and he was right there, and he was chasing me. And I thought we were going to get killed. I didn't know what he was going to do. You know, he wasn't a big truck, but it was like a big U-Haul or something. And finally, I decided what we'd do is I would be on the left-hand side of the road, and then we'd come to an intersection. I would suddenly swerve off the intersection as fast as I could and maybe get away from him. And I told my sister to look behind us to see if a car was coming. She couldn't see. And I was just blinded because he was shining his headlights in my mirror. And so I did it and got away from him. And so far as I know, I didn't see him again. But anyway, I turned around, came back, and the thing was still circling the airport. I mean, this guy I thought was trying to kill us. Wow. And so the thing was still circling the airport, and then it took off to the northwest. Well, I drove back up 95, and the ball of light was still there, and the inside of the car lit up in green again. And then I kept trying to follow this thing, but the roads went north and south and east and west, and so I had to zigzag. And finally, I was on this really bad old road that was gravel and full of holes and no place to turn around, and farmhouses that were a long ways away from each other. And I couldn't catch up with the thing. And I finally just quit and turned around, decided to go back. And then we couldn't find the motel, and wound up going back to her place. And then we called our parents and told our roommates, and the roommates laughed at us and everything. And some other things, weird things happened. And then I sort of had a poltergeist experience that night and that morning. And then I had to go to work with this high security clearance. And I was scared to death that I'd just gone crazy.
Oh my God.
But I never heard of poltergeist. I didn't know what was going on. But anyway, that was the last poltergeist experience I ever had in my life. And so anyway.
So what, wait. So what was the poltergeist experience?
Well, I mean, this is.
That's all right. Hey, we're here to listen. John Russell says, see, eyewitness testimony is important.
Yes.
Thank you for the donation.
Bomb there.
Yeah.
We need to know about this.
We got to know.
Oh, yes. Well, anyway, I got back late because I was waiting for the men I was supposed to pick up, and they didn't show up for some reason. But I got back after dark and went to bed, and I kept hearing somebody walking around my room. And there was a little bit of light coming in from the street light, but I couldn't see anybody. And if they got close to the bed, I'd try to feel, and I couldn't feel anybody. And I was terrified, but I kept going to sleep. And then my alarm went off, and I thought it was morning, and got up, and it was dark, and I looked, and it was 1 o'clock or 1:30. And so my alarm was broken, and it was real hard to set, and I usually use tweezers because the little knob was broken off. And I tried to set it approximately for the next morning, and went to bed again, even though I was scared to death, and went to sleep, and woke up, and the alarm went off again. And it was 2:30, just exactly. And then it went off 3:30, 4:30, and 5:30. And then I was sitting on my bed, and I thought, I've gone crazy. I'm going to get fired. I'm going to lose my security clearance. And I was thinking, I'll have to disguise this at work. How will I get through work without talking to anybody and things? And then my toothbrush.
So you were I mean, you got to work and you were shaken. You were upset. You had a hard time not sharing this experience. Is that accurate?
Yeah, really.
Yeah. Okay.
And later I found out more about the photograph, and I actually published it in a scientific journal saying that this thing I saw appeared to have lights that weren't in the visible spectrum. But I didn't say I see UFOs or anything at work, but I was very
I can imagine you didn't.
Did you get the sense that?
Oh, what?
Do you get the sense that these are all kind of related phenomena? These little objects you saw as a child, and the UFOs, and these kind of poltergeist type experiences, or you think maybe there's several different types of things at play here?
I think they're related because that's I got that from the Jenny Randall's book. That oftentimes people that have more than one UFO sightings have experience when they're kids. And usually it's passed off as a dream. But in our case, there were two of us, and we weren't even talking about it. We never heard of UFOs, and it happened. So it was sort of validated it to me in a way. And then Jenny Randall said that people have, that oftentimes there's a tendency or something for people that have sightings as a small child to have them later. And she gave instances, and my sister and I were together both times, which is pretty odd, but we'd both seen UFOs later. And
I have a question. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, that's fine.
Has your sisters have been involved in a lot of these instances, it seems like. I'm curious to know if you have, both of you sat down together and ever done an interview together?
No. We get teased about it a lot. And she wrote up reports and things and drew pictures, but I don't think she's too interested in interviews. And the reason I'm doing it is because I'm in science, and I can say, I have a PhD, I've done scientific work, right. And, I don't think I'm way off in, crazy field.
I did have a question because you are a scientist. I'm curious to know, what was your favorite scientific experiment that you ran? Or did you ever run any scientific experiments on some of the things that you saw?
I think I'm going to have a book published in October that isn't published yet. And in this, I kind of try to address some things about UFOs. This is about, let me see if I have the book here. It's called Beyond PASCAGOULA. And the PASCAGOULA abduction is very famous and well known. And I was working with Flying Disc Press, who published that book and also published my books. And at the same time as the PASCAGOULA thing, something else had happened. And this was a sound that was heard across about half the country one day, and nobody ever explained it. And there was
you said PASCAGOULA?
Yeah, the I've got it pulled up right here.
You want to share the screen?
Yep. Give me a second.
Okay.
Here's my book that I'm going to.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, she's got it. That's way better than what I got.
So this is your new book. So this is not out yet. Is that right?
It'll be out the 1st of October.
Okay.
And I interviewed a lot of people in PASCAGOULA and things, but what I wrote about was something else that happened, and that was a strange sound that was heard across about half the United States, and nobody ever explained it. It made the news on that day a lot, but it never did any time else. And the reason I was concentrating.
What kind of sound?
Yeah, I know. Can you make the sound for us?
No.
It's the brown sound, hopefully. No.
Well, the reason
but like a sound like thunder, or
what is it like?
What kind of sound? Like a buzzing? I'm not sure when you say sound.
No, it's like in the newspapers they always said it was a sonic boom, and I'm not too sure if it was.
Okay, so it was a loud, but it was some sort of loud. It was a very loud, explosive sound.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was a loud, explosive sound, and nobody ever explained it, but it had a whole lot of witnesses, like millions of people, and it was heard over a wide area. And so they always say UFOs don't have a lot of witnesses, and well, this had a whole lot, whatever it was, and it was never explained. And I know it's sort of odd to talk about a sound when you don't have a UFO.
That was really cool. What year is that doing it?
It was 1973. It was on the 11th of October, and about the same time as the PASCAGOULA abduction occurred. But this was, it started in Idaho. It was first Iowa, I meant. In Iowa, at about 8:20 EST, and traveled across the country. Kind of, there were just increments of newspapers reporting it, and over to into Maryland and Washington D.C. and clear down to Tennessee. It was heard, and so I could get newspaper articles that told it kind of. I could estimate the speed it went and the size it was and things like that. And it was very large. It was probably in extent the largest sound in extent ever heard, except for the Krakatoa sound. It was quite wide and long.
That reminds me of the 1997 bloop. There's some weird noises that are heard in the ocean as well. And
really?
They're not studied as much. Yeah, I looked it up. There's a big Wikipedia article on the bloop. There's some theories now that it might be an ice quake, but I think it's still undetermined what these weird sounds are. It's pretty crazy.
I'm just going to speak for the audience. I am so creeped out right now in a good way. But I feel like, I've watched a lot of David Lynch movies, and, this feels like that, but more intense.
I was gonna say, I almost felt like I was getting like goosebumps and like listening to the story, and then like almost it almost reminds me of like an episode of oh God, what's it's the old one? Oh my God, I can't remember.
The Twilight Zone.
Twilight Zone.
The Twilight Zone. Thank you.
Twilight Zone. Yeah. I
was like, oh my God, like I'm getting goosebumps the entire time you're talking.
The man turning around is so.
Yeah.
Well, it reminded me a lot of kind of They Live a little bit. That I don't know, like just these. Anyway, I don't know what made me think of that.
Funny was that right after it happened, my sister moved to Brazil and she became a missionary, and I got married and moved to Nevada. We didn't see each other for 5 or 6 years, and then we didn't discuss it a whole lot. But just several months ago, my sister found a letter that she'd written to my mother on the same day as we saw that after I left. And at that time, we hadn't discussed it a whole lot. But at that time, I asked her, do you remember talking to that man? To my surprise, she said no. She remembered him chasing us, but it was like we were standing there, and he was talking to me and pointing to his head and everything. And it was like she didn't know he was there. And I don't know if she was just concentrating so hard on the object or whether it was really spooky or what was going on. Because
I got goosebumps again. You're killing me.
Well, yeah, I was curious. Nevada and Brazil are both big UFO hotspots. Those are some pretty interesting places to end up.
I just found that out, and it sure creeped me out.
Huh.
Can I ask you mentioned that there was you published the photograph. Is that available?
Yeah, I put it in one of my books if I can. It's in. I published it on a scientific journal too, if I can find it here. And they accepted it, and it was published. I can't see.
Oh, wow.
There it is. I don't know if you can see it or not. I guess you can't, but
yeah, it's tough to see.
what was
ladies and gentlemen, the description,
by the way,
in the description below, you can click the link and go buy the book on Amazon. This was not
Irena,
pre-scripted. I'm just telling you.
Irena, no, don't show it to people. You have to go buy the book. Yeah.
They should be showing the cover.
Don't show us. Yeah, I'm sorry. I did. That was just the teeth. Buy the book. Yeah, the dead tree version.
What was odd about it was I didn't get the wonderful picture I wanted of the 7 windows and everything because of that man. But I did get a picture, and when I took the picture, I just saw one light. It was so far away, I couldn't see the 7 windows. By that time, I could just see one light blinking. But I took a time exposure, and on the time exposure, eventually, after I figured the thing out, well, there were 2 lights, and somebody had to explain to me what it was, but I took the time exposure, and I didn't have anything to stabilize the camera on, and so my hands were shaking a little because it was just a time exposure, and I was holding the camera, but it showed a trace. But what was interesting was there were 2 traces, and I only saw one light. And so I wrote that up and said, you know, there was a light that I didn't see. And then I had contacted the Polaroid company, and they said, yes, you can, with that type of film, you can photograph in a certain wavelength. I forget what the wavelength was now. I think it was into the ultraviolet, that it would photograph into that wavelength where you couldn't see. And so I said, this is probably in that wavelength. And look, I speculated it might have been laser light.
Wow.
But
it's amazing.
But anyway,
right.
it was due to, if I took a picture like that today, you know, with a camera, whatever, iPhone, it wouldn't take, but I took, that was a time exposure, and I was holding the camera in my hand, and so you could see a trace of where the light was, and you could see it blinking too. I got 2 blinks. But there was another trace that went right along with it, and it wasn't quite like that with the blinking, with the one light, the one trace. It was like what I saw 2 blinks. But the other light, it came on at a different time, and it followed the trace, but it came on at a different time, and it changed in brightness. And that's the one I didn't see with my eyes. And so I analyzed it, and I got it in the American Association of Science publication, a write-up on it.
Wow. What year was that?
I think it was 1978.
Wow. Yeah, go ahead, Philip. Cool. Oh, we lost your audio, Philip. Oh no.
It's over. Oh man, yeah. That's the way she goes, right?
That's amazing. So we got to wrap up here in just a second, Irena. But the original story you were telling when you had after the Poltergeist experience, and then you had to go to work next, was there anything else you wanted to share on that part of the story, or did you pretty much wrap that up?
No, I wrote in my book. I didn't ever say anything like I see UFOs or anything, as I said. But I did just mention, I was sort of stirred about it. Several days later, I just mentioned UFOs to my section. And I expected everybody to laugh and fall off their chairs and harass me for the rest of my life. But
right.
Instead, my 2 supervisors said that they had turned in a UFO report from our classified photography to their supervisors, and photographically there was something there, but they said the supervisor said there was nothing there, and told them that was a spot on the film, which it obviously wasn't because they had 2 pictures. And so from that was way back, but I thought the DIA had some had something, to do with UFOs way back then.
Wow. Well, I'm super excited, Irena, because you're coming back on Sunday for the Big Phone Home 2. And I'm definitely looking forward to hearing. I know you're writing another book about governmental disclosure on the UFO phenomenon. Is that right?
I wrote a disclosure article that was published in the MUFON Journal.
Oh, right. Yes, and I'd love to when you come back and we talk on Sunday for that event. I'd love to hear more about what you're thinking in regard to what the government knows, disclosure, and I'd love to hit more on that too, since that's kind of the focus of the Big Phone Home too. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Thank you so much for breaking so many glass ceilings for women. I think that's fantastic, and I love the fact that you're a trailblazer in the scientific community. You're a trailblazer in the UFO community, and we all owe you a debt of gratitude for sharing your story and doing what you do. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's very nice to hear from everybody and to not be laughed at.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no one's going to laugh at you. We
laugh at ourselves. We only laugh at our own stupid jokes here on the Singularity Lab.
And let me tell you, they're pretty stupid.
I think maybe on Sunday, I'd love to hear even a little bit about popular mechanics. Was it popular mechanics or popular science?
I used to write a column for popular mechanics. It wasn't on UFOs or anything, though.
I read that all the time. I love it.
Yeah, I loved popular mechanics as a kid. I read it in the library all the time.
It's really good that I had no money and my allowance was very low. Otherwise, I would have purchased the hovercraft that you were supposed to build out of 5 vacuum cleaner engines and motors.
There's still time, Philip.
Yeah,
there is.
Wow, I bet moms loved that idea.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
All the kids taking apart the vacuums.
Five vacuums went missing in this neighborhood last week.
And a strange craft was seen going down the street, sucking up all the cat litter and all the.
Now that's a Roomba.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a Roomba. That's Roomba technology that was like 50 years ahead of its time.
Right. Irena, can you tell folks where they can find your book, and if they want to follow you? Are you on social media or anything, or how can they follow your work?
I'm on Facebook. It's Irena Scott, and all my books are on Amazon.com.
Amazing.
We also included your link in the chat description below, so if you guys want to go check out her stuff, you can through those links.
That's right.
I have irenascott.com on the internet.
Wonderful. Well, Irena, I look forward to speaking with you again on Saturday, and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining the Singularity Lab.
Thank you. Everybody have a wonderful day, and nice to meet you.
You too. Nice to meet you as well.
Thank you.
Bye.
UFOmba.
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 There it is.
UFOmba.
I think that's an insult. That's an insult on I think Europa. UFOmba.
On the ice world of
Europa. Or it sounds like a delicious dish.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
The
Like
Pan-Galactic Gargle Blaster. Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. I want to make sure, Philip, that people, if they want to listen to the What the If podcast, if they want to check out any documentaries that you've created, where would they go to do that?
Yeah, to find out about my film work, you can go to Phillip Shane. That's Philip with 1 L. That is all my parents could afford. I've carried that around my whole life. Apologies if you're listening. By the way, my mom is a huge UFO fanatic, and my stepfather, they've been married more than 30 years. He is a nuclear physicist, and skeptic. So there's a lot. I grew up in the middle of this. You see, I dream of someday.
It explains so much.
Someday the Sky Bridge will be built. Anyway, go to Philip Shane, Shane, like the cowboy. If you like movies, Phillip Shane, all one word.com. It's my film site, and you can find me on IMDb as well. By the way, on my website, there are links to any of the stuff I work on. If it is available on YouTube or something, I do have a link there. So I believe you can find the Peter Jennings documentary there, or if you just search YouTube, you can find it. Because I think, unfortunately, it's not available on like
I got to go back and watch it. It's been a while since I've seen it.
Yeah. But a lot of the other movies I've done, being Elmo and Dancing in Jaffa, I've also worked on music documentaries. I worked with Paul McCartney and a bunch of other really cool people. Those are all available on all your usual services.
I need to go watch Being Elmo. I heard rave reviews about that when it came out, and I haven't seen it.
It's really good.
Yeah.
I auditioned for Jim Henson.
You did?
Mm-hmm.
What?
Yeah, for the to be a puppeteer.
No,
it was
really.
What was it?
Yeah, I was obviously not good at it. This is I went in there. I was like, "Hey, I'm a puppeteer. Hire me."
You've got a great
sock at least.
Yeah, did you bring a sock with you? You've got a great voice. Like you would have a great voice for a puppet. I feel like
you would figure, but yeah, they passed. Hard pass on being a puppeteer. Yeah.
Tough crowd.
I think I went in there with a terrible New Zealand accent. Yeah, Muppet. Yeah, exactly.
Puppeteer.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, and have you seen Being Elmo, Louis?
Yeah.
Because okay. Yeah. Anyway, for anyone who's interested, boy, if you really want to see how incredible and hard and what it takes to be a puppeteer, it's a fascinating glimpse.
It was a really huge eye opener for me, just that audition. I was like,
I'm
wow.
so glad I didn't get this job.
Like, I wonder what your young qualifications for that are. Like, I grew up and my dad was a puppeteer. Like, how else do you get into this field?
It's the family business.
Honestly, that's a lot of it. And I think also, they audition people that they find interesting or have good voices or whatever. But I mean, I remember being in there and they were explaining your hand in here, right? And how it's like it's hard to explain. It's almost like mask work, where you become a different character when you put on this mask. It was just, I'd never done that through my hand before. That was the first time I'd ever even held a puppet. So that's probably why I didn't get the job, They're like, yeah, this ain't worth it. especially when they've got people who are actually trained.
Yeah.
They've wanted this audition more than anything in their life. I'm like, hey, I'm a puppet. So it didn't work out well.
Yeah. Yeah, when you see it being it's a magical story, and it is somebody you see. There's somebody who from his young, we all watched Sesame Street growing up, but I never did what he did, Kevin, when he was 8 years old. So watching Sesame Street, he was like, how do those puppets work? That's what he wanted to know. And then he started building his own puppets and stuff. So yeah, amazing. It's a beautiful story. Anyway, that and a bunch of other stuff, so fun stuff. Yeah, and the podcast, for those of you who love science and laughter and exploration and imagination, whattheif.com. You can find it. And on Twitter, we are at whattheifshow. I'd love to hear what you guys think. And right now, it's an amazing, I'm telling you, the discussion that these guys brought to the table that's on right now. Check it out. Learn more about these.
I listened to it. I listened to it today. It was a lot of fun.
Cool. Yeah.
And I'm curious. Maybe we'll talk about it next time. But I am curious if you're working on any other films, and maybe we could convince you to do a UFO documentary.
When I left that UFO documentary, my friend Justin, who went on to make the Amazing Randy film, but I was really like, someday.
Yeah.
By the way, I can't live just since it's right here. I do have to give a shout out. I am currently making a documentary about Mist.
Okay, I was looking at that. Yeah.
It really, if for one of the most important video games of all time, one of the best-selling video games of all time.
I remember
that. And it was for me what Star Wars was also for movies. Just this sort of mind-blowing first time somebody had leaped so forward.
Yeah, it was like that. It was the first like high def like CD-ROM like immersive experience, right? Yeah,
and 3D with photorealistic textures. If you looked at it now, it's early work, but amazing. Anyway, but the best thing is, again, it all comes down to the people, as you guys know, and the guys who made it, and the people. It's really about that time of the personal computer transformation, and all the people that those two guys, the two brothers who made it, feel such gratitude for the things that were made that allowed them to do that, the way we feel tremendous gratitude for, like, wow, we can do these things. Somebody built these tools that we're using now to enrich our own lives. So part of the movie is just a lot part of it, but they have an amazing growing up, amazing childhood, but they want to also go and meet, to the extent some of these people are still alive, meet some of the folks who made, oh, wow, you wrote if you hadn't created that software, you hadn't created that chip, or you hadn't written that, fantasy book, whatever, we want to meet them. So pretty cool. It's ultimately all about community and, I don't know, just innovation, stuff like that. I love it. Also, Mist, we did a big Kickstarter. Check it out. The Mist documentary.
John Post says that game single-handedly decreased the birth rate.
Actually, there's a whole nother side to this. I've never had this experience. I've interviewed so many fans of it now. It is one of the few games I've ever heard of that generation after generation after generation played it together. There are people who said, I played it with my parents. I played it sitting on the lap of my mom. So maybe not,
Did somebody create this in the last 5 minutes?
Yes.
Good Lord.
Yes,
fan art.
Grant is so fast. I looked at my Twitter. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. I mean, like, you gotta be kidding me how fast he made this, dude. Like, I understand there's apps out there and stuff, but I mean, damn, dance for me, puppets, dance. I mean, we were just talking about this 2 minutes ago.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
we have the
amazing that they got your audition tape,
ever.
Right?
Yeah,
you think 2 minutes.
This is hidden footage of my audition.
We may have lost time, and I don't know what year is it. There may have been a time gap here. Somebody stopped that.
Mick would debunk and say that Tony Hawk is the best game.
I will tell you, I got to. It's not something you can find, I don't think, but I got to film Tony Hawk himself doing. There was an MTV comedy series some friends of mine did called Human Giant, which is an amazing thing, and they did some sketches with Tony Hawk, and I did all their sort of behind the scenes documentary. So,
dude, you have the best stories. You're coming back for a 2-hour interview all by yourself very soon, if you don't mind. I'm making you do it.
Whatever. It's fun. I love hanging out with you guys. You guys are awesome.
All right. Well, we'll see you Sunday as well.
Yes, I'm really
Big Fun Home.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Indeed. Thank you.
All right. Phillip, it's just amazing to spend time with you, and I very much look forward to doing it again. Make sure you all go follow Phillip, follow his work, check out all of his documentaries, and follow him on social media. Phillip, have a wonderful, wonderful
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Watch the skies.
Later. What a great show.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. All right. So we'll see you guys tomorrow at the Unidentified. Oh, by the way, make sure if you're here right now and you haven't subscribed, make sure you do so. And go subscribe to the Unidentified Celebrity Review. Also go subscribe to Rather Be Squidding, because we're going to be blowing your socks off this weekend. We're also going to be on Spaced Out Radio tonight. I might have to take a nap.
That's what I might have to do too.
We forgot about that.
11, we go at 9, 10, 11, 12, so midnight for you.
Midnight for me. Midnight to 3.
Woo! Woo! But to be fair, I told you about it about 2 weeks ago.
Yes, but you did say it was Friday.
That's not on me. That was on Dave. That's not my fault. That's not my fault. That's what he told me.
All right. So fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining us today at the Singularity Lab. I really appreciate all of your chatterversing. John. Look at what John says. Rather.
It'll lose the effect if I say it too much.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, you save that word for when you really mean it, rather, because it's way better.
You can do other languages. What was that my observation when we went to see Jungle Cruise, right? There's like two, like he says bugger, right? He curses in
British
English.
Yeah.
And then
coming out of the rock's
she
mouth.
can't even say oh my god. She says oh my gosh over and over again, but he can make a really mean British curse because nobody gets it.
Right. So
Klingon, a really mean British curse?
Well, I mean, it's butt fucking. It's butter.
Oh.
You didn't know that?
I had no idea.
Now you know. It's a British colloquialism.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How did that get in there then? If you guys know,
It's
Disney
not for
had
the
to have
Brits,
known,
I
right?
guess.
Yeah, I guess
They don't care if they hurt British children like Americans.
I think it's an American audience, and Americans don't know what that means. I think
Maybe it's dubbed in the English version. The British version.
Maybe.
Bunker.
All right, y'all get the hell out of here. Everyone go home. Go home.
All right.
Bye.
Peace.